Almost everyone who responded would allude to that water is life. Without water, there is no life.
Hello everyone, we are finally back with another episode of Peace Only Podcast, where we take you inside the lives of our volunteers. I'm your host, Franco Latona. This week we're talking to health volunteer Lamley, who talks about her village's struggle with perhaps the most precious resource on earth, water.
I'm a health volunteer in the region of Fatigue, and I am in my second year with a couple of months left.
Since the very beginning of her service, water has been a limited resource in Lamley's village. Now, just to be clear, I say limited, not depleted. Lamley and her community do have water. It's just, as Lamley will explain, become more and more of a chore to obtain. The problem? Salt. Her village is located near a delta.
All of the bodies of water around us are brackish salty. That's good for having a whole variety of fish in your bowl and having a lot of seafood options and protein in your food, but not so great for some of the fields and for water sources.
Lamley says the people in her village subsist almost exclusively from farming and fishing. So a lack of water makes it difficult to grow crops.
But it also just makes it difficult for running water.
At one point, a few years ago before Lamley came, an NGO built a water tower with running water sources.
But the water source that served the area became salinized, and that in turn ruined the piping. And so that system hasn't worked I've never experienced it in my service, and I know that before I came, it hadn't worked for a little while. And I think even when it was working, there were problems.
Now, all water must be pulled from wells. But that too is an imperfect method. Lamley says the abundance of water in the wells is largely dependent on the time of year, like the one located right in front of her host family's compound.
The further away from rainy season it gets, the drier and lower the water level gets.
She says it completely dried up for a few months this past year, causing her and her family to have to look elsewhere.
You have to go further distances, of course, and each well sort of has a culture. You know, there's people that always go to the same wells, and when the levels on the wells dry, then you have people having to readjust and redistribute themselves, and it makes lines longer.
And it's not just the well near Lamley's home. As the distance from rainy season grows longer, more wells become compromised. So much so that
a number of wells just have to be closed because they're dry.
As you might imagine, Lamley says the lack of water in her village causes people to worry. A lot.
It gradually becomes more and more to consider, more and more of a chore, a literal chore, and more of a thing that takes up a lot of time. What I realized with this increasingly difficult search for water is that it dominated conversation. It was the only thing that we were all talking about.
Lamley says she's even had to make adjustments to her own schedule and daily habits.
I would have to make sure to get the water a day or 2 days before so that it could sit, because at the bottom of the well, the amount of sediment it just goes up, and unfortunately the amount of light silt sediment, that proportion goes up, and so you have to let it sit longer because that's less dense, and so it just floats in the middle. And
not only that, but
for me, I stopped making my breakfast because I didn't want to waste, quote unquote, wastewater doing dishes. If I did want to make something, it would be heavily dependent on which utensils I would be using and what would be easiest to wash and how I could bunch up things together and wash them all at once, or maybe it would be a laundry day. And, all of these things, it just became, how can I get more water? When can I get more water? What do I need to do to get water?
Still, as a Peace Corps volunteer, Lamley is pulling water only for herself. Some compounds in her village consist of 10, 15, even 20 people. And the women of each household, because women are predominantly responsible for pulling water in rural Senegalese villages, are collecting water every day for daily chores, cooking, laundry, washing dishes.
I would see these women who are going and getting water for households of 20, for multiple times of multiple laundry runs a week. I knew that I was just getting the smallest taste of what it was like and what that pressure was. So just the little pressure that I was thinking of when can I do my laundry? What do I need to do to make this happen? I was getting just a touch of that mental load, that mental energy that's required to just make it work and what the women have to do and what people in general have to do to make it work, because there is no other option.
Worried about the long-term consequences of water shortages, Lamley decided to take action. She called several village meetings to discuss possible remedies.
I wanted to see if this was a priority and if people would be willing to adopt it as their project. I wanted to make sure that it was not my thing, that it wouldn't be something that I, as an outsider, came in and dictated people do.
As she proposed the idea of fixing the wells, Lamley says the village locals kept emphasizing one main point.
Water is life. Almost everyone who responded would allude to that water is life. Without water, there is no life.
So Lamley contacted a local organization, PROSAF, which is a French acronym. It's a local NGO created by the Lutheran Church of Senegal. One of their initiatives focuses on improving access to clean water. In fact, they'd previously done a couple well projects in Lamley's village.
They constructed a well at the elementary school in my village, and it's a beautiful well and it has a cover.
So Lamley has been working with PROSAF in the initial stages of planning the project.
All of them are going to get covers because none of them are covered except for the one in the school right now. I'm going to get covers. If they lack it, they're going to get concrete around the perimeter, and higher walls if needed, reinforcements on the insides if needed. We've gone through and assessed each of the wells, and so we have notes for what well needs what.
Several of the wells will also be dug deeper in hopes that the water levels remain high long after rainy season is ended. Although Peace Corps Senegal's mission in its health sector has largely moved away from construction projects and into training local health workers, Lamley's situation highlights an important role volunteers play in their communities. She identified a dire need, not just knowing of it, but actually experiencing it along with the people in her village, day after day. Then, she reached out to a local NGO for help.
They do have that knowledge of, because they are more local, of the people they use, the prices, and you can use that to get a better gauge for what the situation would be in your actual village.
With about 4 months left in her service, Lamley hopes the project will be finished by the time she goes home. She says it would be the most important contribution of her service. This experience has had a profound impact on Lamley. Poor access to water is unusual, at least to the extent that Lamley is experiencing it. But living in villages with scarce resources, think food, clothing, cosmetics, is a common theme for volunteers here in Senegal, particularly in rural places. And this can sometimes cause volunteers to wrestle with their consumption habits after returning home. For example, I go out to dinner with a friend and order a steak, a whole steak, just for me, knowing full well that most people in my village eat meat just a few times a year. There's a million examples like that. But the point is, volunteers often wrestle with this issue. How can I consume so much knowing, and not just knowing of, but knowing well, people who have so little? Lamley encountered this issue about a year ago when she went back to the US for a vacation. She figured that this eye-opening experience would automatically make her more conservative in her use of water.
And the first week I was back, super aware of water, I was making sure, to try and be very intentional about how I use my water and what I did and what I didn't do.
But by the second week,
I took a bubble bath.
a bubble bath. Lamley says her vacation was hectic. She was driving all over the place, visiting friends, not resting.
One day my body was just sore, and my friend that I was visiting was like, oh, well, I've got these Epsom salts, and like, let me run you a bath. I got jets, and the amount of water that I sat in, just me, just like a week and a half before, I would have gawked at that amount of water just being used to sit in. I would have thought that I would physically be unable to do that.
It made Lamley think.
I realized just how easy it was to fall back into the same behavior despite having knowledge or despite having gone through a significant experience. And
How did that make you feel?
That scared me. That going through something that I thought would change me may not have changed me as much as I thought. What this was telling me is that I'd have to be intentional, I'd have to put in effort, and I'd have to be uncomfortable.
So, what's the solution? Are Peace Corps volunteers just doomed to a life of constant guilt after returning home from service?
A lot of the things we encounter in the States seem to just magically appear. You open the water faucet, water comes out, you close it, it goes away, you don't think about it anymore. You use the bathroom, you flush, water goes away, you don't think about it. You throw something in the trash, it gets taken away, you don't think about it. And shifting that to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard because it's not a necessity. I think being knowledgeable, it doesn't mean that you have to live this life devoid of pleasures, devoid of using your resources. But I think that it's irresponsible not to make yourself aware of the impact and to consider that. So there's always considerations that go into every decision you make. Some things outweigh others. Some things are deal breakers. Others are absolutely necessary. And I think what our responsibility is to acknowledge the impact that our behaviors do and acknowledging a line, being aware of all that we do and the impact that it has.
Thank you, Lamley, for sharing your story. And thank you for listening. I'm your host, Franco Latona. With that, I say, Babenen and Gongo, à la prochaine. Until next time, Inshallah.